Ritual sacrifices of human beings is nothing new in Nigeria, most especially when elections are drawing closer. With the general elections coming up in February of 2023, more and more stories of people getting kidnapped for their body parts is on the increase. It was the same case in 2014 with the general election scheduled for 2015. So many atrocious activities were reported, one of which was the Soka House of Horrors, where human beings were kept and dismembered for sale for ritual sacrifices. Welcome to my channel. Before we go on, kindly subscribe and click on that notification as I take you to the forest of horror in Ibadan, Nigeria. Our case today begins in March of 2024 in a community in Ibadan, in a particular forest that later became known as the Ibadan Forest of Horror. This area is located off Lagos-Ibadan Expressway on an area that is characterized by trees, shrubs, and basically just forest land. So on March the 21st of 2014, a young man called Kazeem, who is a motorcyclist, which is popularly known as Okada. If you are in Kenya, what I mean is the Boda Boda. In Nigeria, it is called the Okada. So this person, Kazeem, was going about his business at Ibadan, Nigeria. Now, Kazeem has been an Okada rider for years. He was well known in the area, especially by his colleagues, his fellow Okada riders. I think they had this type of union that all Okada riders were registered. That's every Okada rider in the area was registered with. So they all pretty much knew each other and they were very familiar with each other. So on this day, towards sundown, Kazeem was going about his business. Like I said before, he had a client that he needed to drop off at a certain location. So while he was at it, he gets a phone call. Mind you, he was riding his Okada at that particular time. So picking up that phone call was not going to be possible, but this person who was calling was relentless. I mean, Kazeem's phone kept buzzing and buzzing, so he had no other option than to just stop the Okada and answer his call. The person on the other end told him he needed Kazeem to come pick him up and take him to an area in Soka. This person wasn't a random person, you know. Kazeem knew this person. In fact, report says that they were friends or maybe acquaintances. Kazeem was like, okay, I'll come get you, but right now I have someone on my Okada and I need to go drop this person off. So as soon as I'm done dropping this person off, I'll come get you. This person kept insisting that Kazeem needed to hurry up because he was in a hurry to go to the Soka area. Now, Kazeem continues to his destination. By the time he had dropped off his client, it was already getting dark and he was still expected to, go back and pick this person that had called him earlier to take him where he was going in Soka. Working late into the night is not new to Kazeem. I mean, he always goes out early and returns back late in the night, so it wasn't like new to him. But the place where they were supposed to go was remote, so he began to, have this kind of uneasy feeling that he didn't want to ride back alone at that hour of the night all by himself. So he goes to pick up a relative of his to accompany him. The plan was that the three of them, that's Kazeem and his family member and the customer, will all board the Okada to Soka. Then when it's time to return, he would at least have his family member with him just as a companion, Kazeem arranges with his family member and then picks them up, and they both go to pick up this customer, and then they now head into the Soka forest area, and that will be the very last time that anyone will see them. Now, the very next day, Kazeem's family, who had waited for him to come home the night before, were worried. They hadn't heard from him, he hadn't called, and he didn't come home. It wasn't like him. It didn't take long for them to realize that something was just not right. So they all began to ask questions. They were asking around about him from his friends and his acquaintances and other Okada riders, but no one seemed to have seen or even heard from Kazeem. It was the first customer whom Kazeem was going to drop off when he began to get the phone calls from the second customer, who then told people that he had seen Kazeem the previous night, and while he was going to drop him off, someone was calling him to come take him into the Soka forest area that evening, and Kazeem had said he was going to pick up the person. So at least Kazeem's family now know that he went to the Soka forest area that Friday evening. So where was he now? He doesn't know anyone there. So where did he even sleep? While they were still trying to, figure out what to do next, events began to unfold rather quickly. So a call comes in that Saturday, the 22nd of March 2014, towards midday, and it was from Kazeem. Okay, his family were like happy, that at least he wasn't missing like they thought. He was at least, alive and well. At least he had called. But that feeling of relief was short-lived, as what Kazeem told them next would send dread and panic through his family and his friends. So Kazeem tells them that he doesn't know exactly where he is and that he and others had been buried alive. He went on to say how they were on their way to Soka when they were attacked and then dragged into the deep forest. According to him, he didn't even see those who captured them because it was already getting dark, I meant to say, by the time that they were ambushed and taken deep into the forest, but he had been buried on the ground. He doesn't know exactly where this was, but he knows that it's in the Soka area. The people who took Kazeem had collected his phones, but unknown to them, he had his smaller cell phone on him and he had hidden it. And that was what he used to send distress text messages to people and to call his family too. Now, his family, upon hearing this, are beginning to like panic. His friends and, his fellow Okada riders immediately, when they heard this story, dropped everything they were doing at the time and began to mobilize, to bring their own home. If one of theirs was in trouble and needed help, they were going to help him. So a group of Okada riders, including members of the, Soka unit of Amalgamated Commercial Motorcycle Riders Association of Nigeria, came together in the numbers. There is one thing with Nigerian Okada riders, right? In every town, no matter the city or the town, they are super organized. If a vehicle knocks down one Okada rider, within minutes, you will see hundreds of other Okada riders in the vicinity. So that was what happened on this day in Ibadan. As news began to spread that Kazeem was in trouble, Okada riders began turning up to go on a, search and rescue mission. When they got together, they moved together as a group into the Soka area of Ibadan. When they got to areas they could no longer ride, they all began to walk, They were calling out Kazeem's name, but no one was answering. Mind you, by this time, Kazeem's phone, that's the one he used to contact them, was no longer going through. It was no longer reachable. Maybe ran out of battery, or the kidnappers found it on him and confiscated it. No one knows, but it was no longer connecting at that particular time. Even the network service in the area was kind of sketchy, so it could maybe be the network service. So the Okada riders were all shouting Kazeem's name and checking for anything that looked like the ground had been disturbed or unearthed. Remember, he told them that he was dragged into the forest and buried. So they were all looking for an area where the earth had been disturbed. As the group moved into the forest, they moved further into the forest, they came across a small stream that had this, makeshift bridge running across it. This area they came across was very, watery, had water, it was waterlogged area. So by the side, around the bushes, they saw a motorcycle. The motorcycle was just laying in the bushes, and immediately they identified this motorcycle as Kazeem's. That meant that something had really happened to him, and he must have been, held not too far from that particular area that they discovered his motorcycle. So this kind of gave them motivation. I mean, they needed to find him ASAP. He wouldn't have been able to survive for that long under the ground. So they splitted into smaller groups so that they would cover more ground, and also so that it would be quicker and faster too. So now a group stumbles on this area that had these uncompleted and dilapidated buildings. Mind you, this place is deep into the forest. Lots of people didn't even know that deep inside the forest there's such a place and there were buildings in such a place. I mean, who will come up here to build? For exactly what? What were they going to do with the buildings? So this group began to, move closer to the buildings, at least to check it out. Now, as they got closer, what they heard coming from the inside of the buildings was enough to send chills down their spine. So coming from the buildings were cries of human beings who were in agony. I mean, immediately they knew that something was going on inside these buildings. But as they all made to get closer to the buildings, gunshots began to ring out immediately. I mean, someone or a group of people began to shoot at them. Mind you, these guys didn't even come with any form of weapons. They were just Okada riders that was looking for their members. At most, what they had on them was just tree branches. There was no way they were going to be a match to these people who had weapons. Besides, they didn't even get to see who was shooting at them. So what they did was to retreat and then went back to the other group to tell them that they had stumbled on something, and also tell them how they had cries coming from the building and how they got shot at while they were trying to investigate it. So what they did was that the search party merged again. At least now they had more numbers, right? So some of them called the police while others who had weapons back home went back to get them, and then they all remobilized and went back into the forest, now prepared for anything that will come their way. As they got close to the buildings, those who had been shooting at them initially saw that they were, outnumbered, and this group that had returned were angry and basically ready to fight. So they all ran off. They knew they were no match because they were seriously outnumbered. So now, miraculously, a call comes in from Kazeem again. All this while his phone had not been connecting, right? But now he was calling them again. And he told them that he could actually hear them, that he could hear the few steps above where he was buried, that he could hear them moving and speaking. What that means is that basically that means that Kazeem was in that area and they might have even been close to him, or maybe even standing on top of his grave. So they all began to, frantically look for him around where they were. The group of Okada riders proceeded to break into the buildings and were, searching for Kazeem. It was then they stumbled on a sight so sore that it will remain embedded in the minds of some of them for the rest of their lives. In this particular room, well, let's call it a hall because it was quite big and quite long. There were people chained to the wall and slabs, men and women begging to be free, begging to be given water and food. I mean, people were desperate and begging for their lives. At first, when they barged in, some of these people didn't even know who they were, whether they were, friendlies or hostiles. They were not sure. I mean, I don't think they had even seen any friendly person at all in that area throughout their stay in captivity. So some began to cry and plead for mercy. They didn't want to be killed. Others just wanted food or water. The Okada riders were confused as to what they were saying. As they tried to make sense of the situation, they all began to cut them loose immediately. Some were able to get up and run away from the place after being cut loose, but others could not just move. They had no strength. A lot of them were just tired and emaciated. They hadn't been fed in days or maybe weeks. As the Okada riders continued to search the buildings, what they were coming across was just too disturbing, to say the least. See, no matter how prepared you are or what you think you had seen in this life, that nothing shocks you anymore. This case was different. It was just gut-wrenching and very disturbing to see people tied up like animals and begging for food and begging for water and crying out in pains, and yet the people who had kept them didn't flinch. It just shows how wicked the heart of man really is. Moving on to another building, the group comes across decaying bodies. I mean, the entire building was full of bodies in different stages of decomposition. As if that was not enough, some of these bodies were missing body parts, literally. There was some without head, some without upper or lower limbs, some were just the torso that was left. It was just very disturbing. The entire place was smelling of death, basically. With this discovery, it was clear that the group had discovered a den of ritualists where people were captured and brought to be used for their body parts. So upon further research, the group discovered more and more scary stuff in the areas of the forest surrounding the buildings. They found skulls and bones and numerous skeletons and more decomposing bodies. Another building had clothing items laying around. I mean, there were shoes, there were pants, there were handbags, jewelry, traveling bags, driver's license, wallet, passport photographs, so many personal items. One of the national driver's license had a name, Nicola James Idowu of NYSC Secretariat on it. Another driver's license also had Saidi Adetoro of Ogba Lagos on it. It was just a lot of personal items in this area. Mind you, the group are still looking for Kazeem, right? They tried to call him, but the phone will no longer go through. But after a few tries, it connects, and they ask Kazeem exactly where he thinks he was. He says he's not sure, even though he could actually hear them louder. It was at this point he tells them that his phone battery was going to run down, like it was running down already, and that they should please find him quickly. So immediately the group began to dig. They knew that Kazeem was underneath somewhere. They knew he was under the ground somewhere, maybe even an underground bunker, But if it means digging up the entire area, they were ready to do so. So they dug everywhere, basically anywhere that they thought was big enough for a human being to fit. For hours they dug, but there was no Kazeem. When they tried to call him again, his cell phone was off. Apparently his battery had drained by that point. The realization that they had lost Kazeem forever was so sad for them. I mean, here they were rescuing other people, but the major person that they had come for, they didn't find. By this time, the police had arrived. I don't know what took them so long, but they arrived. When all of the search and rescue was already done, I think that was when they arrived. So they too quickly realized that this situation that they have seen, this situation presented before them, was way larger than what they had anticipated. I mean, who would say all of these decomposing bodies laying around and human beings that look like skeletons, plus all the numerous skulls and bones and missing body parts, and the person wouldn't do a double take? The group fed the police in with what was going on, and they insisted that they needed to keep searching for their man Kazeem. At this point, they didn't even know where to look again. I mean, they've exhausted their options, but giving up was not part of the plan. Even though his phone was no longer connecting, he did say he could hear them, right? So them being above him, while he said he could hear them from underneath, they definitely knew that he was in that area under one of the buildings, of course. But after searching and searching and searching, sadly, Kazeem was never found. Nobody saw him. They never did find Kazeem. Now, when news spread that a den of ritualists had been found in Soka forest, people began to, journey into the forest to see things from themselves. Some with the intentions of looking for their lost family members and loved ones. The authorities also swarmed the areas in their numbers. Police vans began to, pull up, and men in uniform surrounded the vicinity. Some of these captives who had been rescued left the area, but others who didn't have the strength were still around. Some people had given some water to, quench their thirst, but the level of ill treatment that their captors had meted on them was glaring, as right there before the policemen, some even lost their fight and gave up the ghost. They just dropped there. Just by mere looking at them alone, they looked so malnourished, and some had bones sticking out everywhere. Some were just mere walking skeletons, basically. It seemed like these captives had been brought in at different times, and the ones who had been there longer were those that suffered the most. They had been starved for a longer time. That's why the more recent captives at least had the energy to run away from the area upon being released. About 23 people were rescued on that day, 8 of which were in, critical condition and had to be moved to a hospital for treatment. It was after treatment that they were able to give an account of what had happened and how they had found themselves chained up inside the building in Soka forest. One of the stories we heard is one of the much older victims. I think her name was Cecilia. So Cecilia was in her 70s. She had gone missing from her hometown in Edo State of Nigeria way back in, I think, 2008. Yes, it was in 2008 she went missing. Considering that she was found in the Soka forest in 2014, that would make it 6 years that her family didn't know where she was. What this also means, sadly, is that whatever had been happening, whatever had been going on in that forest had been happening for a longer time, like far longer than the 6 years Cecilia was held there, because she did talk about meeting other captives there when she was brought in back in 2008. Now, Cecilia got missing from an entirely different state, right? And then found herself in Ibadan. This also means that there is a network of kidnappers whose operation spans different states of the Federation. It's like an entire network of criminals that operate interstate. The story was that Cecilia had gone to the market in Edo State in 2008 but never returned back home. It was only after the Soka Forest of Horror had been discovered and the media would put out pictures of some of the survivors, including Cecilia, that her family saw her and then came to claim her. All this while, none of them had imagined she would have been anywhere near Ibadan. 6 years is a lot of time. It's a long time, and poor Cecilia had survived. This also means that there must have been someone keeping her alive, right? Who was it that was providing her food and water? Even though she was, severely emaciated and malnourished, she must have been fed to have been able to at least survive for 6 full years. So, who were these people and where were they? Who did they work for? Where were they taking the body parts to? What were they doing with them? And most importantly, how were they capturing their victims? And this brings us to the story of another survivor. I think his name is Nofiu Shitu. So according to Shitu, he used to hawk local herbs and native medicine in markets and on the road. So on this particular day, he was going about his business when a group of men suddenly grabbed him in broad daylight. According to them, they were government officials, and Shitu was, violating the law by hawking in the area. Now, this is not an uncommon sight. We get to see this a lot in Nigeria, how hawkers are often, harassed by the government officials. So in Shitu's case, it didn't seem different, and no one thought anything was amiss. People actually saw them grab Shitu that day, but they must have assumed that, okay, maybe it's just, tax force or government officials like they say they were. Not until Shitu found himself chained up in the forest. Shitu at first was in denial when he found himself chained up inside one of the buildings, but as the time went on and he realized that he actually had been kidnapped for ritual purposes, as he did witness other captives get caught up for their body parts. That was when it occurred to him like, okay, this is real. This is really happening to me. I have been kidnapped and I'm going to be used for rituals. Another survivor had narrated how he had traveled to Ibadan, and then while he was in the vehicle, the conductor of the vehicle he had boarded took over the vehicle and pointed a weapon at all of them passengers, and then he now drove them into the Soka forest. This man said that soon as they arrived, two of the people brought in with them were immediately decapitated by men he described as hefty men who had told them that that would also soon become their fate. These were just people traveling either for business or to visit families. It's not uncommon in Nigeria to hear that someone had traveled and didn't get to their destination and there was no accident on the road. This is just a scenario that shows what really happens that we do not know about. Most times, drivers and conductors are paid to deliver their passengers too. For me, it's the audacity of these men. See how they are carrying about their evil acts in broad daylight, kidnapping people under the guise of being drivers or conductors or government officials, precisely officials of the Urban Renewal Initiative coordinated by the Oyo State government at the time. Now, if you decide to look deeper, you will notice that these supposed government officials might have been targeting the vulnerable men and women who are, alone and homeless or poor because they believe that no one was going to look for them. And as for Kazeem's case, that sole customer who called him to take him to Soka seems kind of really suspicious to me. If you decide to look at it logically, why must it be that he must go to Soka that night? Why couldn't he, just reschedule when Kazeem told him he was going to drop someone off? It's not clear if he was ever, located and questioned, but him being a part of the kidnapping syndicate is not far from the truth. Obviously, Kazeem was lured into that forest. Also, among the victims that were rescued was a woman who claimed that she was delivered of a baby 2 days before the discovery of the den and that her baby was immediately sold by her abductors. So, this also means that they were involved in child trafficking too. That woman might have not even been pregnant before she got kidnapped. They might have purposely gotten her pregnant in captivity to sell off her child. How many more women had they done this to? These are things that so many media outlets who had reported on this case didn't talk about. In the abandoned buildings, there were telltale signs of assault and the torture of victims, but people are not even talking about it. There is more focus on the ritualistic aspect of things. Now, Titi Adene Yudopese, who was also a survivor, said that for her, she was at her house when she was picked up by the men who turned out to be her captors. So on that fateful day, right in front of her home, that was where she was sitting, they all arrived and they told her that she was needed somewhere. She still does not even understand how she willingly followed them, but she also found herself chained and tied up inside the forest. This was basically broad daylight kidnapping under false pretenses. I also think that these people use juju to make some of their victims to follow them without asking them questions. I mean, it's not the first time we have heard of touch and follow in Nigeria, but the more disturbing thing is the number of men who are willing to get other human beings and delivering them to people who will use them for their body parts. I am almost sure all these people who have been captured or caught up were sold by someone who knows them. It could be family members or neighbors or acquaintances, all because of money. The dark market of dealing in body parts is not new to Nigeria. There's actually a place in Port Harcourt where people said that there's a thriving market in human parts dealing. I think Iche local government, that's where they say the place is. I will be making sure to bring you one of the cases from this area soon. But what I'm trying to say is that dealing in human parts is something that is becoming too rampant in Nigeria. If you watch my case on Adam, the Nigerian boy whose torso was found in the River Thames in the UK, you understand that these people are extending their tentacles everywhere, even across borders. And it's becoming very, very worrisome. It's a thriving market, believe it or not. People are paid to locate a victim, and most times they mark people they know. Then another set are paid to do the kidnapping. Then there is the set that is paid to harvest the parts. Then there's also the guards who patrol the area, keeping away unwanted individuals. Then there are those that deliver these body parts to the end user. And so the chain continues to grow and grow. But one thing we should know is that sitting on top of that chain is a person or a group of persons who have all these other people under their payroll. Like it or not, there are our fathers, our mothers, or even brothers and sisters. It's really sickening, that the fact that every single day a man or a woman was kidnapped and brought to the Soka forest is just an indication that this whole situation wouldn't have stopped. In fact, nobody would have said anything if not for Kazeem, the Okada rider. Now, when the police took over the Soka Forest House of Horrors, they took account of the bodies they could see. The figure ultimately was about, I think, 50 decomposing bodies. Even though the numbers varies according to different reports, at least we know it's not less than 50 decomposing bodies that were found in this place. This excludes all other body parts that were also found. The skulls that were found were 100 skulls. So where were the rest of the bodies? Taking someone's head, of course, is not done for nothing. It's most definitely for ritual purposes, which most likely is for money rituals. Then there were also numerous bones scattered all over the buildings and the surrounding areas. Guys, this means that people were actually being slaughtered in the hundreds over the years in this particular forest. Even if they hadn't been used for their body parts, considering the dilapidated situation they were in, many would have equally passed away from hunger and starvation and illness. Some survivors did mention that some women will be brought in there and they'll be assaulted before they met their end. I talked about this earlier and it really, really breaks my heart. It's just horrible to think that all of this were going on here, yet no one knew or raised any alarm. The Soka forest was in a community, and as for the people who lived in this Soka community, I just don't understand. Did they not hear anything? Did they not see anything? Was there nothing suspicious at all? Did they not see the people coming and going from this location? Some of the mechanics who operate close to the forest claim to have, sighted some persons in posh vehicles at the site of this horror situation on a number of occasions, but they just didn't know exactly what was going on there. It was said that there was a factory that was close by the House of Horrors. People worked there. I believe if the Okada riders who had come to look for Kazeem could hear cries and agony that they had from a distance, they too should have been able to hear cries and the wailings of these people, right? Or was it that they just decided on their own to assume that nothing was going on there, just so they didn't get sucked into whatever was happening there? It just doesn't make any sense that this atrocious act went on for far so long. It's really, really sickening. As of how this building came about, it said that part of the forest was actually occupied by some construction firms who left at the completion of their project, leaving behind the structures that were used by the kidnappers to perpetrate their evil. I also understand that originally this place was said to be, used as a place that people with mental health issues were brought, but how on earth would anyone think that this actually remotely even looks like a mental institution? I also understand that certain people had actually reported the activities that were going on in this forest. There was a claim by the youth in the area that the Oyo State Police Command refused to actually investigate the forest despite several kidnapping cases reported in the state. The police ignored it because, according to them, mad people were being brought there. It is said that the forest was acquired in 2011 for rehabilitation of the destitute taken away from the streets in this effort to, beautify the environment of Oyo State. But the effort could not be sustained as no provision basically was made for their maintenance. The premises in question until the time of unearthing the dastardly art have always been in custody of the Oyo State, so it was actually government property. Now, if there really were mad people here, how about checking on this place? I mean, how about checking it out and seeing what people were saying? How about checking what people were talking about? That something suspicious was happening at this particular place. It's just the height of negligence for me. I must say that using that pretense and keeping people there as mad people when they were not mad and then torturing them and dismembering them is just so evil. And these people were using this excuse to bring in people every day to this location and then calling them mad, and no one questioned them. After all, it's a madhouse, so who cares about mad people? The most annoying part of this case was that when the story began to spread about the Soka forest, the Oyo State government immediately swooped in and demolished the place. As in, basically, they just leveled it down. No investigations, nothing. Just when people were about taking interest in the case and, coming to take pictures and all of that, the government thought that it was wise to clear out the place without a proper investigation. It's almost like some group of high-powered individuals wanted the case to die down. Else, why should that have happened? I mean, why should the government decide that they were going to just level down this place and pretend that it didn't exist, like nothing happened there? Kazeem hadn't been found yet. They knew that Kazeem hadn't been found. They didn't think of looking for him. He was obviously down there from all indications, but they shut down the place. Everyone were now begging, people were begging and pleading that instead of demolishing the place, they should at least dig up the area so that they could find Kazeem, deceased or not. They wanted to find his body, but all pleas were met with deaf ears. Forensic experts from the nation's capital did arrive Soka some weeks later, but all they met was just leveled ground. There was no single building that was up, nothing to investigate, so no evidence was left behind. It's like nothing had actually even happened in that place. All the people who were hoping to, find clues on what had happened to their missing loved ones were disappointed to see that the men in uniform had been placed on the property to stop them from going through the belongings that were found there. The belongings like the shoes and the bags and clothing that would have, helped to identify their loved ones. With all the anger of what the government had done, people began to protest, and the men in uniform opened fire on them for protesting, and this led to the demise of more people. It's just so sad that life basically means nothing to uniformed men in Nigeria. How do you come at people who are already aggrieved? Many of the people who besieged the scene were rounded up by the security men and they were thoroughly beaten. A man who was even called pastor, who had gone to the place, armed with a cutlass in search of a neighbor of his that he said his name was Dari, whom he said had been missing, was also beaten by the uniformed men, and he was wounded on the left face with the butt of their weapon. Why do these men always have to be so trigger happy? Why were they so desperately trying to keep people away from the Soka House of Horrors? Most importantly, what were they trying to hide? The discovery of the Forest of Horror generated so much controversy throughout Nigeria at the time, and even now too is still very controversial. Following the discovery of the Soka House of Horrors and the aftermath of the attack on people by men in uniform, people actually began to carry out their anger and frustration on anyone that they were suspicious of. Some people who suspected a man that dressed like a lunatic but was making a call on a mobile phone, allegedly advising the receiver of the call not to come to the area, was pounced on. The man was actually beaten thoroughly and burnt alive. There was also another man who was found with 3 human tongues at, I think it was in Ring Road at Ibadan. This person was nearly lynched, but for the intervention of the policeman. Another man and a woman who had been staying so close to, I think it was Muslim flyover on Lagos Ibadan Expressway, they were acting like lunatics. But when they were searched, the people around saw that they had blood-stained cutlass and a plain white cloth among other items that were allegedly found on them. The people attempted to, set them ablaze with tires drenched in fuel, but they were not successful because, according to them, a man and a woman began to chant some incantations, so the fire refused to catch. The police had to come and rescue them. Another man who was acting like a lunatic was also attacked. It was alleged that the man had a weapon, a BlackBerry, and 3 human tongues, and about 400 posters of a particular political party aspirant with him, and as well as some amount of, foreign currencies and plenty ATM cards. To avoid being lynched, the suspect was said to have pleaded that he would give the mob 2 million naira, an offer that even infuriated them the more, thus making them to set him ablaze. I mean, jungle justice is obviously not the way out, but saying that the government didn't want to help, all they wanted was, cover up and to pretend that this happened. The people were, very, very angry, and out of desperation and anger, they were looking for an outlet, and anyone that is suspected of being a ritualist, even remotely, they will attack the person. The people thought that there was serious link between the kidnappers and ritualists of the, Soka House of Horror and some top government officials and notable politicians in the state, but they just didn't seem to have any clear evidence to establish that fact. Thanks to the government, now we can only speculate about the true reason the Soka House of Horrors existed in the first place. A lot of Nigerians did say that since the general elections were the very next year in 2015, the activities of the House of Horrors must have been intensified, because this was the time that politicians will usually carry out their ritual killings in order for them to, win elections. Next year is actually Nigerians' general election again, and all the ritual sacrifice stories have again begun to intensify. The prayer now is that there should be no other new Soka House of Horror discovered, but is that even possible in Nigeria? Is it safe to say that there are more of these types of places scattered around the country, yet no one had discovered them yet? We are hoping not to discover them. Let me know what you think about this though in the comment section. It would be really, refreshing to have your take on this, whether you are a Nigerian or not. Is it safe to say that this kind of places still exist in Nigeria and are yet to be discovered? It's been years now, and Nigerians are beginning to, move on from what had happened at Soka. That is one thing with Nigerians though. Things like this happen so often that you can only pray and then move on from it, because no government is coming to give you any form of clarity. You are expected to assume that this never happened. You are expected to just pretend that it never occurred and then you move on with your life. As for now, it said that the Soka site had been redeveloped into a school left to me. No child of mine will attend school in a place filled with so much pain and agony. It's sad that Kazeem was never found. He most likely might have perished under the ground, or the kidnappers must have taken his life. He was a good man. His colleagues described him as a gentle and focused and diligent man, originally from Olomi area of the state. He was just a hardworking person, trying so hard to make ends meet for his family when he was snatched. So that's it for Soka House of Horrors, guys. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications. Until next video, stay safe.